Namaste, my name is Sanat Kumar. Welcome back to the Manana podcast. Manana is a Sanskrit word that means reflection or contemplation. In this podcast, I'll be sharing my deep, insightful reflections for you to contemplate and hence live a life of fulfillment. I hope you find great value in today's episode. We've all had that one friend who everyone called a bookworm, or at least we know someone who our parents called a bookworm. And of course, there are people who your parents call smart in honor of their exam scores, but you've realized them to be just a bookworm. It's been a topic of interest for me for a long time. When people notice someone who reads a lot, they label them as either a bookworm or a wise man. So, what distinguishes between the two? But of course, in this episode, I'll not be talking about what people think of another person. Instead, we'll be seeing objectively what makes one a wise person and when is a person not wise but a worm. We all know almost intuitively the answer to these questions. And yet, we either fail to even ponder these questions or we fail to use the insight from them in our lives. We've come across people like this, one who reads a book similar to Built to Serve or listen to a podcast called Greatness Guide, but fails to respect and serve the old members of his or her own family. One who has read a book similar to Atomic Habits or Power of Habits and yet fails consistently to install any new good habit or remove his or her bad compulsive habits. We have seen one who has read a book called The Alchemist but has failed to pursue his or her dreams. We've seen one who reads a book called The War of Art and yet fails to even remember the last time they defeated their resistance to make art. We've also come across one who has read a book called Courage is Calling but still fails to make the leap. In other words, he fails to be courageous enough to stand for himself. A person who reads a lot of books but does nothing concerning what he has read can be referred to as what we call a bookworm. It is said that most students of Gen Z are in fact bookworms, whether they realize it or not. They are worms, basically. And the irony is, it is these kinds of people who talk ill of books, especially non fiction and even especially self help books. Someone would have the right to speak of books if at all they had tried implementing what the books have offered in their own life. They won't do that, but they have their tongues, so they talk. Books are a tool that can help us understand reality. However, bookworms don't see it that way. They probably think what they read is entirely different from reality. Forget about understanding reality, they aren't able to connect what they're reading to their life. The wise, however, is quite the opposite. All he reads is quickly turned into wisdom. How does that happen? He reflects on it, he goes and does an action, so he gains experience, and that experience gives more reflections. That in turn gives wisdom, which I've presented in my book also. In the wisdom petal, knowledge plus reflections is equal to wisdom. Of course, when I say reads, I not only refer to reading books, but I refer to all forms of consumption: podcasts, lectures, videos, even the movies he or she watches, everything that he or she consumes, he reflects on to turn them into wisdom. Such is a wise man. Of course, it is not a new philosophy. It has been part of Jnana Yoga for ages. It is referred to as Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Shravana is the consumption, as I mentioned earlier. Manana is the contemplation or reflection, which is the name of this podcast. Nididhyasana is the meditative or the final stage that leads to enlightenment. However, it's not to say these must be in sequence only. They can be and must be practiced parallelly for the best growth in terms of awareness. So that is what how a wise man approaches. And of course, it's not possible to just consume knowledge without reflecting on it. It can cost your mental health actually. The more the power of knowledge you have, the more the power of reflection you require. Observing your thoughts, that is self reflection, becomes very important as your brain thinks more and more complex problems. Containing the power of knowledge is not an easy task. I'm saying from my experience, this is directly from my reflections. No wonder the bookworms do not act on what they've read because they've actually not learned or realized anything. He has just read through. Without reflection, it's not learning and it won't stay. However, the wise becomes the wise because he knows and will manage and bring balance and contain the power of knowledge. So here's the question underlying the core of this episode. Are you wise or a worm? And by the way, if you're not a reader, you may not be a bookworm, but you have all the chances of being just a worm. If you haven't yet, you can choose what you want to be from now on. Just ponder about what you've consumed and recheck whether you've lived up to it. Now go back and listen to this episode again and start reflecting on it. I hope you received excellent value in today's episode. To know more, head over to sanatkumarnabi.com, and if you haven't already, check out my book The Flower of Fulfillment. Thank you for listening, and I wish you have a great day.